On this day, the 11th of December, 1868, the Battle of Avay takes place. The Battle of Avay, you will ask, where is that, and what war is that? It is a part of one of the oddest wars I've ever read about. The War of the Triple Alliance between Brazil, Uruguay, Argentina against Paraguay. Paraguay had a population of about under 500,000, 450,000 people. Brazil, Argentina and Uruguay together had a combined population of 11 million at the time. Brazil had a formidable navy, the strongest navy in the Western Hemisphere, just behind the newly created or newly expanded American Navy, which had been expanded during the Civil War. But before that, the United States didn't have much of a navy either. So Brazil had one of the largest navies in the world at the time, 45 ships, 239 cannons, 4,000 trained crew, 16,000 soldiers. Argentina had 8,500 troops and 4 naval vessels. Uruguay had 2,000 troops. Paraguay, with its 450,000 people, had 60,000 troops and dozens of naval vessels. Although Paraguay doesn't have a coast, it does have access to the Paraguay and Uruguay rivers that go down to the Rio de la Plata and out into the ocean. Paraguay was ruled by a bit of, I don't know if he's a madman or what, or maybe what he was doing seemed to make sense to him. Francisco Solano Lopez, who inherited the presidency after his father died. So in many ways, like Kim Jong-un of South America back then. A hereditary president. And the whole situation began, the war began, not in Paraguay, but because of Uruguay. The Brazilians and the Argentinians were backing one side in a civil war in Uruguay, and Paraguay was supporting the other side. And Lopez had this idea that he wanted Uruguay to be friendly to Paraguay, and that together two smaller countries could achieve a third way or independence from the larger powers, Argentina and the Empire of Brazil. There were also other issues. This was a few decades after the Spanish Empire had collapsed. Borders were very difficult to delineate. A lot of the landscape was forests, bogs, marshes, and people didn't know which river was which, and should the border be in that river or this river, and that would make a big difference because it would probably be hundreds of square miles, maybe thousands. And so there were the border problems. No one really knew where the borders were. Everyone was saying, well, the border's towards your side, and they would say, no, the border's towards your side because we want all that land. And Paraguay also wanted the area between the rivers Uruguay and Paraguay, a flat, fertile land, and if he could get that, he could have a border with Uruguay and have direct contact with the sea. So there was that. So when Brazil, with the secret kind of cooperation of Argentina, was crushing one side of the civil war in Uruguay, President Lopez sent a demand that the Brazilians get out. He also requested from the Argentinians that he should be allowed to send 20,000 troops through Argentine territory. This was refused. Firstly, because Argentina didn't want an army that big marching through their provinces, and they didn't want him to reverse what had happened in Uruguay. Uruguay by this time had basically become a Brazilian puppet state. So, in short, Paraguay invaded Brazil, declared war on it, because they saw what Brazil had done in Uruguay and they didn't like that. That's when they made the demand, or the request, to Argentina to send troops through their territory, which was refused. And a year after the next year after the war had begun, he then invaded Argentine territory. At this point, the Triple Alliance was born. Argentina, Brazil, and their puppet state of Uruguay combined forces and began a war against Paraguay. At first, Paraguay did quite well. They did take lots of territory, they had some victories, but inevitably they were going to lose against Brazil and Argentina. So, the Imperial Brazilian Navy and the Imperial Army, together with the Argentine Army and some Uruguayans, but it was mainly the Brazilians, fought and began to crush Paraguay. Throughout this war, and as a result of the disruptions, starvation, famine, and all the rest, somewhere in the region of half the men were going to die. Half of all men in Paraguay would be dead by the end of this war. A population of 450,000 went down by almost 200,000. Brazil lost quite a few people as well. It's over 50,000 Brazilians dead. Altogether, they estimate that it could be as many as 500,000 dead in this war. And when you think populations of all those countries were just over 11 million, that's a huge number. So, the 11th of December, 1868, the Battle of Avay, was when forces of Paraguay faced off against the Triple Alliance. So the Imperial Brazilian Army was the main guys in charge of this, and they were the ones that dealt them a blow at this battle. They had already taken the capital, and they were heading out to take the other towns. Lopez, after these battles, and this was one of the last major battles of the war, fled into the countryside where he carried on a guerrilla war until he was killed in 1870. Now, the absolute goal of this man, the ambition, he was a leader of a tiny little country that was landlocked, poor. It wasn't industrialized, it didn't really have that much in the way of wealth, and he declared war and invaded his more powerful neighbors. Now, I don't know whether this was madness or whether it was some twisted genius, although he was a fan of Napoleon Bonaparte, apparently. When his father was president, he was sent to Europe as a representative, and he stayed in Paris for about 2 years, and he became very fond of Napoleon and had a uniform that was just like his, and the uniform of his army was very similar to the Grande Armée. So maybe he kind of was infected with Napoleonic madness, thinking that he could go and conquer and create an empire. But whatever happened, he destroyed his country. And they were only left with about 40% of their territory after the war. And there were people in Brazil and Argentina that were talking about just extinguishing Paraguay altogether, splitting it between them, and ending it. So they were lucky to get away with what they got away with. The occupation of the country lasted a couple of years, and Paraguay was almost completely destroyed. And Lopez, well, I suppose he must have believed what he believed, because he went on to die a martyr's death. So, on the 11th of December 1868, one of the last great battles of the War of the Triple Alliance, the Battle of Avay, took place and ended up in a Triple Alliance victory. If you like these videos, come back for more tomorrow. Comment, subscribe, like.